The infamous Cold War has started again, and this time it's literally a Cold War because it's happening in the Arctic. It's because more than 22% of undiscovered natural gas and oil in the world, which is one of the most important natural resources to mankind, has been found buried under the thick ice and freezing waters of the Arctic. Yes, you heard it right, the Arctic.
The Arctic could hold 90 billion barrels of oil and 44 billion barrels of natural gas liquids.
But only this time it's not just the United States and Russia who are participating, but other countries like Canada, Finland, Denmark, Sweden, and even the notorious China want to join in. And every major nation in the world wants a piece of it. In fact, a lot of it. But the question is, who does the Arctic belong to? The Arctic, or what we all know as our North Pole, is a very crucial region on our planet which significantly impacts all of us living in different parts of the world. This desolate frozen desert of ice, glaciers, and polar bears help to regulate global temperatures, sea levels, and our weather system. And without the Arctic and the Antarctic, which are the natural thermostats of our planet, survival of all living beings would become very difficult. And we all want our polar regions to stay the way they are, frozen and intact. Every year, scientists from more than 20 countries participate in the research to understand the effects of climate change and conduct experiments in the frozen Arctic. But ironically, when it comes to the access to these natural resources and economic interests, the collective mission to save the planet starts to melt. And it's not just about the natural gas and oil every nation is eyeing upon, but the Arctic also have massive quantities of important minerals such as diamond, copper, nickel, iron ore, etc., which has the potential to bring a boom to the mining industry as well. In fact, Russia has been a dominant player of the mining domain in the Arctic region. It produces 11 metric tons of phosphates on an average, which is almost 8% of the global output. Phosphates are important mineral salts which are widely used in agricultural fertilizers, treating water, and other important chemical use. This goes to show that even though the Arctic may be a harsh, cold, icy desert, it has the potential to benefit agriculture and the ability to provide clean water to different parts of the world. Greenland, which is part of Denmark, has about 10% of all the world's fresh water reserves, frozen and untouched. And as more resources are being discovered, every nation wants to capture large portions of the pie as much as possible. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, every Arctic country has a legal right to use its waters up to a distance of 200 nautical miles from its coastline under the specific maritime zone called Exclusive Economic Zone. These open waters are the areas where countries like the United States, Canada, Russia, etc. can set up oil and gas rigs and conduct fishing operations. The area beyond the economic zones is preserved and protected by the Arctic Council and prohibits exploitation of any resources found in these areas. But after the discovery of huge quantities of natural resources, every Arctic country has suddenly started to claim the areas beyond their permitted economic zones as their own territory. And to everyone's surprise, even China claims that it is a near-Arctic country. But which country can qualify as an Arctic nation depends on its geographical location. And if its large areas fall inside the Arctic Circle, which is at about 66 degrees 30 north latitude towards the North Pole, it is considered to be an Arctic nation. And only regions of the United States, Russia, Canada, Sweden, Finland, Norway, and Greenland, which is in the Kingdom of Denmark, fall within the Arctic Circle. In recent years, after China announced itself as a near-Arctic nation, Russia has started to remilitarize their coasts in the Arctic. Also, Russia claims that their continental shelf goes beyond the 200 nautical mile boundary, which means they have the right to dig oil and gas found beyond their exclusive economic zones. A continental shelf is a geographical feature of a landmass or a country that determines the true underwater extent of the landmass before it slopes into the deep ocean at a point called the shelf break. And these shelves can be very well beyond the 200 nautical mile boundary, but it needs to be proven by the country claiming their extended continental shelves. And any country can appeal to the UN committee with enough proof that they do have the extended continental shelf. Because if proven, countries like Russia can have exclusive rights to exploit resources beyond their legal limits provided by the UN. But this process can be a very complex geopolitical tug-of-war that can take decades before any conclusions are drawn. So instead of waiting on the UN bureaucracy, different nations try weird tactics to claim their presence. And China, which is geographically not even an Arctic nation, claims itself as a near-Arctic nation by deploying its icebreaker ships Zilong 1 and Zilong 2 for breaking up ice, making way for other commercial and scientific operations run smoothly. According to China's Belt and Road Policy, China plays a key role in the global infrastructural development initiative. Therefore, according to them, no parts of the world should be left unattended. So even if China is not truly an Arctic country, it is an important observing member of the Arctic Council. Therefore, it likes to keep a tangible dominant presence in the Arctic. The icebreakers are just an excuse for that. But other major nations like the US and Russia also have their icebreakers deployed in the polar region. But they have an upper hand in establishing a more stronger presence in the Arctic because after all, they are truly Arctic nations. And it's not just the deployment of the ships and military that matter. This whole scenario becomes even more complicated when the ice starts to melt during the summer season. As the ice in the Arctic starts to melt, it also opens up northern shipping routes like the Northwest Passage, an important sea route that gives access to sea transportation connecting the Atlantic and the Pacific directly via the northmost state of the United States, Alaska, and through the Canadian Arctic archipelago. Along with Northwest Passage, other routes also open up like the Northeast Passage and the Northern Sea Route. And with potentially high percentage of natural resources, the Arctic Sea Route also provides economic advantages to the shipping industry because using the Arctic route cuts down distances between Northern Europe and East Asia to a maximum of 3,000 nautical miles or 5,556 kilometers. This helps cut down travel time up to a maximum of 16 days. That could cut down transportation costs significantly. But shortened distances does not necessarily mean time gained. The Arctic icing conditions keep changing all the time around the year. Sometimes it becomes nearly impossible to move because large portions of the Arctic water freezes up to a depth of 2 meters and more. And ships cannot break and cut through such dense ice. And sometimes icy waters are slushy, filled with partially molten ice that adds a lot of drag on the ships, making it difficult for the ships to maneuver and also reduce fuel efficiency. But all these routes are controlled and governed by different countries differently, depending on the ease or difficulties for the ships as melting and freezing patterns shift. The Northwest Passage, which passes through Alaska and the Arctic Canadian archipelago, did not impose tariffs on shipping companies using their route because of unfavorable icing conditions. However, Russia imposes heavy tariffs on the companies who choose to use the Northern Sea Route, which heavily overlaps with the Northeast Passage because these routes are generally ice-free and provide better navigational conditions. But using Arctic routes for economic advantages comes with a lot of challenges. The ships used for Arctic routes are specifically designed to handle the severe weather and icy waters. It also requires specially trained crew to operate in these regions. Along with severe weather, rough seas, and bone-freezing temperatures, icebergs are one of the deadliest threats to the ships. And we all know what happens to the ship if it hits an iceberg. And a lot of countries are hoping for the ice to recede in their area to the extent where navigation can become easier, which could be used as leverage to impose more tariffs. Receding ice also opens up new fishing grounds, bringing more business opportunities to the fishing industry. Recently, after Russia's decision to remilitarize the coast along the Arctic Sea, the United States has also started to increase its solo and joint operations training and drills in Alaska with other NATO countries. Every Arctic country and even China are trying to increase their presence in whichever way it deems appropriate. So what's the future of the Arctic dominance and who will win this literal Cold War? Well, as much as you like to think, but it's not a straightforward answer and it's not about who wins or who loses. It's more about putting efforts in preserving the fragile geography of the Arctic. And countries like the United States and Canada are taking positive steps to protect the Arctic. These countries have banned the exploitation of natural gas and oil in various regions of Alaska and northern Canada in order to protect local wildlife and environment. But increasing Russian and Chinese activities in the region forces the US and Canada to increase their presence as well. And unfortunately, such political power plays damages the fragile ecosystem of the Arctic. With a significant shift in type of energy consumption, where the entire world is moving towards other cleaner forms of fuel, many companies have shifted their focus on the production of energy which is cleaner and more efficient. And yes, there may be a gold mine of oil and gas buried under the ice and seas of the Arctic, but it's better to leave some places just the way they are for the sake of our environment, humanity, and all other living beings. Because this Earth is the only place we have which we call it our home. This is Stories Across, and thank you for watching.